We have a reality show host masquerading as President of the United States of America who came to this chamber yesterday and, in a Hollywood-style production, pretended to act presidential. But the question that we confront is one that Richard Nixon actually first raised in November of 1973. When he said the American people deserve to know whether or not the president is a crook. That was an observation that Richard Nixon made in the context of the Watergate scandal, which began as a nickel and dime break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the summer of 1972. And obviously concluded with impeachment proceedings and the ultimate resignation of a president in disgrace. Nixon made the observation that the American people deserve to know whether or not the president is a crook. And many people across the country are raising a similar question, because 17 different intelligence agencies have concluded that the Russians, at the explicit direction of Vladimir Putin, interfered in our election for the purpose of helping Donald Trump. But yet it's hard to get an independent investigation going in this place because my friends on the other side of the aisle continue to put party ahead of country. But that's just the beginning. We know that as early as December of 2015, at least 4 different cronies of Donald Trump were in regular communication with Russian intelligence agents at the same time these individuals were hacking into the DNC, the DCCC, and the Clinton campaign, interfering with our democracy. These individuals were Michael Flynn, who came to become Trump's first national security advisor, Carter Page, who was his former foreign policy advisor, Paul Manafort, who was the chairman of the Trump campaign, Roger Stone, a longtime affiliate. If they were having these conversations at this time, we know they probably weren't talking about Russian vodka. What were they talking about? The American people deserve to know. We also are aware that Michael Flynn had an illegal conversation in December of 2016 with the Russian ambassador, where he discussed sanctions that were imposed on Russia because of their hacking. He then apparently lied about this conversation to the vice president, who then went out and misrepresented facts to the American people. And then Michael Flynn resigned in disgrace. But we still can't get an independent, nonpartisan investigation in this place. But that's not all. We know that Donald Trump has not been bashful when going after our allies, like Mexico, or Australia, or NATO, or the European Union, or this past weekend, France. He's not bashful about being critical, but he can't say a negative word about Vladimir Putin, a brutal dictator. It appears that this president is more determined to make the Kremlin great again. But that's not all. He refuses to release his taxes, despite promising the American people that he was going to do so prior to November of last year. What exactly is he hiding in these tax documents? And yet we still can't get an independent investigation. We also know that the White House Chief of Staff engaged in potentially unlawful conversations with the FBI, perhaps trying to get them to obstruct justice in the public sphere. in the midst of an ongoing investigation. All we're saying is connect the dots. This should not be a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. The American people deserve to know whether or not the president is a crook.